Hello and welcome to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben, and today we're diving deep into one of the most influential, if often misunderstood, theories in tabletop role-playing game design, the big model, also known as Forge theory. Whether you've heard of it through Ron Edwards, the Forge forums, or just as a weird echo in a Reddit debate about narrativist games, we're going to unpack what this theory actually is, where it came from, and what it's useful for, and why it still matters, even if you never touch a Forge game. We'll break down its 4 layers, talk about real game examples, and even spend some time with its critics. So, let's dive in. The big model, developed in the early 2000s by Ron Edwards and expanded through discussions on the Forge forums, presents a layered framework for understanding tabletop role-playing games as social and creative practices. This lecture explores each component of the model: social contract, exploration, techniques, and ephemera, and situates them within real-world examples from a range of games, including Apocalypse World, Fate, Dungeons & Dragons, and Dogs in the Vineyard. It also critically assesses the model's limitations, its reception, and its relevance in contemporary game design discourse. In the world of tabletop role-playing games, theory often lags behind practice. We play first and rationalize later. But around the early 2000s, a group of designers and theorists began to flip that script. Led by Ron Edwards, they founded The Forge, an online community that became a crucible for a new way of thinking about role-playing games. Not just in terms of rules or stories, but as holistic, layered social experiences. The centerpiece of this movement was what came to be known as the big model. This theory, often simplified as an expansion of GNS theory, attempts to map how different aspects of role-playing interrelate, from the social norms at the table to the moment-to-moment speech acts between players. While the big model has its detractors, its value lies in offering a structured lens through which to examine design, play, and player expectation. So we'll present the big model not as dogma, but as an interpretive tool, one that when used thoughtfully can clarify the messy business of collaborative storytelling. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the RPG landscape was dominated by legacy systems like Dungeons & Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade. These games carried heavy mechanical and narrative expectations, often framing the game master as a de facto authorial god and the players as reactive participants. Enter The Forge, a forum launched in 2001 by Ron Edwards. Its mission was to empower independent creators, challenge design orthodoxy, and create language to talk seriously about what role-playing was and could be. Games like Sorcerer, My Life with Master, and Dogs in the Vineyard emerge from this milieu, each foregrounding player choice, thematic play, and mechanical narrative integration. At its widest level, play is embedded in a social contract, a mutual agreement, often implicit between players about what they're doing and how they'll treat each other. This includes who brings snacks, when the game starts, whether player versus player is acceptable, what kind of content is off limits. Though this may seem trivial, it's foundational. Without shared norms, even the best mechanics can collapse. For example, Fiasco assumes a high-trust environment. Characters will betray each other, but players should not. A table-running Call of Cthulhu may agree that character death is expected and horror takes precedence over power fantasy. That's social contract work, even if it's unspoken. Inside the social contract is exploration, the shared imaginative space that players agree to inhabit. Edward defines this as involving 5 elements: character, setting, situation, system, and color, meaning mood, tone, and aesthetics. Exploration is where fiction is made real through consensus. It's not just what you imagine, it's what the group accepts as canon in the moment. The importance of this distinction becomes clear in system-like games like Fate Core, where players co-author aspects of the world collaboratively. One level down, we encounter techniques, the procedures and habits used to translate rules and narrative intent into play. Techniques include rolling initiative, using conversation tools like lines and veils, framing scenes, spotlight sharing, skill check modifiers. While rules often inform techniques, they don't prescribe them fully. For instance, both D&D and Dungeon World involve combat, but the technique of resolving those fights varies widely due to narrative framing and pacing. At the deepest layer is ephemera, the minute-to-minute interactions that constitute actual play. This is everything from dice rolls, descriptive narration, player jokes, in-character dialogue, I stab the goblin moments. Ephemera are fleeting but essential. They are the lived experience of the game. In Apocalypse World, for example, a single move may generate a rich narrative moment shaped by tone, delivery, and table dynamics. A core component nested within the big model is the idea of creative agendas, shared priorities that shape how players engage with the game. This is where the GNS theory, gamist, narrativist, simulationist, comes in. While often misunderstood or misapplied, GNS was never meant to say people only can play one way. Instead, it proposes that any given time, a play group or session tends to emphasize one agenda over others. Gamist play prioritizes challenge, fairness, and achievement. Players seek to overcome obstacles and win according to the game's internal logic. Game mechanics tend to be crunchy, competitive, or tactical. So, for example, Dungeons & Dragons, especially in its 3.5 or 5e editions, is often played in a gamist mode. Players build optimized characters, tackle encounter-balanced dungeons, and seek treasure or power-ups. Gamist design thrives on clear objectives and mechanical balance. You can think about games like Pathfinder, Shadowrun, or the 4e incarnation of D&D, where tactical grid combat and character builds are a major draw. Narrativist play emphasizes theme, moral choice, and dramatic structure. Players collaborate to generate a meaningful story, often wrestling with hard decisions. The mechanics serve the story, not the other way around. In Dogs in the Vineyard, players take on the role of Mormon-inspired lawgivers in a frontier setting. Every conflict builds around moral questions. Do I shoot the man who lied to protect his daughter? The system, with escalating dice conflicts, reinforces these dramatic tensions. Narrative systems like Fate, Apocalypse World, and Burning Wheel don't avoid mechanics, they integrate them into narrative expression. Simulationist play focuses on internal consistency and verisimilitude. The goal is to model a fictional reality as faithfully as possible, whether that's a medieval kingdom, a noir city, or a cosmic horror setting. So, for example, Call of Cthulhu and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, especially 1e and 4e, are rich in simulationist detail. These games prioritize mood, atmosphere, and rules that reflect the dangers of the world. Simulationism isn't about realism. It's about genre fidelity. A simulationist game of Star Trek Adventures may not mimic real science, but it will replicate the logic and tone of a Star Trek episode. So now let's walk through how the big model applies to actual play in a variety of systems. So in Dungeons & Dragons, for example, social contract, often informal, one game master, 3 to 6 players, weekly sessions, the game master has final say. Exploration is about character classes, maps, dungeons, loot tables, and monsters. Techniques include initiative order, skill checks, XP progression, describe your action, then roll. And the ephemera are things like I cast fireball, the goblin misses, do I see anything in the hallway? Depending on the group, D&D can swing wildly between gamist, min-maxing, simulationist, gritty survival rules, or even narrativist, especially in story-driven campaigns. In Apocalypse World, the social contract is that everyone contributes fiction, the MC doesn't plan outcomes. Exploration is a post-apocalyptic setting generated collaboratively through playbooks and questions. Techniques are moves that trigger narrative changes, fail-forward principles. In the ephemeras, I open my brain to the psychic maelstrom. She seizes control with violence, etc. The Powered by the Apocalypse system is built to foreground ephemera. What players actually say and do drives all of the mechanics. In Fate Core, the social contract is explicit collaboration. Players create the setting together. Exploration are things like aspects, locations, stunts, all co-authored. And techniques are invoke, compel aspects. Exchange fate points to push the narrative. An ephemera is I spend a fate point to declare I've been here before. Fate deliberately blurs the boundaries between layers, inviting players to shape techniques and exploration together. In Dogs in the Vineyard, this social contract is morality is up for debate, but players must take it seriously. Exploration is a mythic west. Faith and law collide. Techniques are things like escalation dice structure, conflict resolution before narration. An ephemera is I call down the authority of the king of life. I draw my gun. Every choice in Dogs matters thematically. The GNS agenda here is distinctly narrativist. Fiasco. The social contract is no game master. Everyone shares control of the story. Exploration is co-authored relationships, locations, and needs. And techniques are things like scene framing, dice assignment for outcomes. Ephemera is let's make this scene where I find out you stole the money. Fiasco is a love letter to ephemera-driven improvisational storytelling. Now let's talk about some of the limitations and criticisms of the big model. One of the most common criticisms is that GNS theory, and by extension the big model, oversimplifies how people play. In real groups, agendas often overlap or shift dramatically, even within a single session. What about players who love crunchy combat and rich storytelling? The big model can feel reductive when applied too rigidly, failing to account for hybrid experiences. Prescriptive misuse. Many detractors argue that fans of the big model confused analysis with prescription, turning a descriptive model into a way of saying what good play looks like. The Forge was notorious for heated debates, and some of its proponents were accused of elitism, dismissing traditional games as outdated or incoherent. Language barriers. The Forge created an entire vocabulary, bangs, stakes, setting, conflict resolution versus task resolution, those sorts of things. For outsiders, this jargon became a barrier. Even the big model's layers can feel abstract or redundant when you're just trying to run a fun game night. Neglecting emotional and cultural play. Some critics have noted that the big model often underemphasized emotional bleed, cultural norms, and effective dynamics. While social contract theory touches on this, it's not central. In contrast, modern indie design often foregrounds conversation tools, trauma mechanics, and consent culture, areas the big model largely left under-theorized. Despite criticisms, the big model left an enormous mark on modern role-playing game design. Its layered structure helped deconstruct the complexity of play and made visible the scaffolding that holds our games together. Its influence can be seen in the rise of explicit design, the Powered by the Apocalypse, Belonging Outside Belonging, and Forged in the Dark games openly credit the Forge lineage. Session Zero culture. The widespread norm of discussing expectations before play mirrors the social contract layer. Narrative mechanics. Ideas like story now, fell forward, and player authorship owe a great deal to the narrativist agenda. Even critics have often built upon the big model, refining its terms or adapting its spirit in new directions. In short, the big model is less a rule book than a lens. It doesn't tell you what game to play, but it can help you understand why your game works the way it does. While the big model is often discussed as an analytical tool, it can be equally powerful as a design framework. Understanding how the different layers of play interact can help you build games that feel coherent, intentional, and alive at the table. Here's how to apply the big model practically when designing your own tabletop role-playing game. Step 1. Start with the social contract before writing rules or lore. Ask yourself, who is this game for? How do I want people to treat each other while playing it? What expectations does the game need to set explicitly? For example, in Monster Hearts, the game text begins with conversation tools and consent discussions, setting a tone of emotional vulnerability and player trust. That's social contract embedded into the text. Consider adding rules or sidebars that support your intended contract. Calibration tools, expectations for tone, dark comedy versus gritty realism, or even practical concerns like how long sessions are expected to last. Step 2 is clarify the space of exploration. Build out the fictional elements that make up your game's imaginative space. What's the genre? What kinds of characters exist? What's the setting's tone and mood? What kind of situations should arise? In Blades in the Dark, exploration is rooted in a haunted industrial city. The mechanics, stress, clocks, factions, reinforce this gritty heist-based world. Rather than building a whole setting first, define the game's exploratory palette, a focused menu of character types, narrative hooks, or tonal anchors. For example, everyone plays a cursed knight in a crumbling empire. This already narrows the field in an evocative way. Step 3, choose techniques that reinforce your agenda. Now that you've got the world and expectations, build mechanics that reinforce how you want players to engage with the fiction. Ask, should scenes be player framed or GM framed? Do you want tight turn structures or loose conversations? Should mechanics emerge from narrative or lead it? For example, in 10 Candles, scenes are framed by players but resolved by candlelight, literally. The physical ritual shapes the emotional tone, reinforcing the game's tragic horror. So design procedures, not just rules. If your game is about emotional fallout, maybe you include a mechanic that forces players to choose between healing themselves or helping others. That's a technique that expresses your agenda. Step 4, tune the ephemera. Finally ask, what will players say and do at the table minute by minute? This is where design becomes about player experience. What kind of language will your mechanics prompt? Will people say, I hit it with my sword, or I confront my father with the truth? Are they rolling dice, drawing cards, writing journal entries? In For the Queen, players answer questions one by one. There are no dice or stats. The emergent ephemera are storytelling, silence, and tension. Try playtesting your game by scripting a short dialogue between players. If it doesn't sound like the kind of game you're trying to make, revisit your techniques. One of the big model's strengths is that it encourages layer alignment. A common design flaw is when a game's rules, its techniques, don't support its intended mood or story, its exploration. Using this framework lets you ask, is my combat system too crunchy for the story-driven experience that I want? Are my social rules too vague for a political intrigue game? Does my game say it's collaborative but mechanically privilege the game master? For example, The Quiet Year is a map drawing game about a fragile community. It has no game master and its conflict mechanics are abstract. That coherence across layers is why it works. A big model checklist for designers, things like layer design, questions, social contract, what expectations do players bring? How is trust maintained? Exploration, what world, genre, and conflicts does the game support? Techniques, what procedures shape scene structure and conflict? And ephemera, what do people say and do during moment-to-moment play? Using the big model doesn't mean your game must fit into a rigid theory. Instead, it provides a diagnostic lens. If a playtest feels off, you can examine each layer to see where friction might be occurring. By designing with awareness of these layers and how they interact, you can create games that are not only fun and functional, but intentional. And in game design, intention is everything. The big model remains one of the most ambitious frameworks ever created for analyzing tabletop role-playing games. Its layered view from social norms to momentary actions offers a way to understand play not just as rules, but as a conversation, a culture, and a collaboration. While its terminology may have faded from the forefront of design conversations, the ideas it introduced continue to shape how we build and critique games. It invites us to ask not just what a game is, but what it does to mechanics, to narrative, and most importantly, to people. As players and designers, we may not always agree with the Forge's tone or methods, but the big model gave us a map. And in a hobby full of unexplored spaces, that map is still worth unfolding. So thanks for tuning in to RPG PhD, and I hope this deep dive into the big model helped demystify some of the ideas behind one of the most influential RPG theories. If you like this lecture, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss future explorations of game design, storytelling, and role-playing theory. And, as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.